This video will discuss how to cite books using the Chicago referencing style. As a reminder, we'll only focus on footnotes in this video. There's a separate video on bibliographies. Books are going to be one of the most common mediums that you cite, and they can serve as a foundation for citing other sources. You might ask yourself, what do I actually need to include in the citation? Well, according to the Chicago Manual of Style, a reference to a book must include enough information to lead interested readers to the source. You can use that guidance whenever you're considering what information to include in your footnotes, whether for a book or another type of source. So let's take a look at this basic footnote to give you an idea of some of the basic information you need to include. I'll highlight each part of the citation as we go along. First, we've got the author, which in this case is Howard Zinn. You'll notice for a footnote, we generally format the authors as it's shown here. First name first, surname last, that particular order. Next, you've got the title in italics. So, A People's History of the United States, 1492 to present. The edition I cited was the third edition, so we'll want to make sure I include that. In round brackets, I have the publication information, which usually includes the publication city, which is London, the publisher, which is Pearson, and the publication year, which is 2003. And I also have the page number right here. So that's going to be some basic stepping stones for many book citations. There are going to be some variations, of course. For instance, what if you have 2 or 3 authors? Well, most of the information is going to be the same. But when you have 2 authors, like in this case, you will generally want to include them in the order that they're listed in the publication. So in this example, Sarah Matthews Grieco is listed first, followed by Geraldine Johnson. So that's what we're going to put in our footnote. And then you include the rest of the information as usual. So title, publication information, and so forth. It gets a little more complicated when it comes to books that were written by 4 or more authors. It'll get a bit unwieldy to include every single author in the footnotes every single time. So you'll definitely want to include all the authors in the bibliography. But for the footnotes, you're just going to include the first author listed and then the words et al., which means and others. And then you will cite with the usual information. Now, you may have seen in the example picturing women in Renaissance and Baroque Italy that the end of the author's names, there were the letters EDS followed by a full stop. That indicates that this is an edited collection, and so these particular authors were actually editors. And so we need to indicate as such. And so that's how you do it. After the author's name, you'll put an EDS full stop. Now, most of the time, editors will get the same treatment as an author. But what if your book has both an author and an editor, or an author and a translator? Well, you will usually cite the author first. Then, after the title, you will write the editor or translator's name, usually preceded by the appropriate abbreviation. So EDS full stop if it's an editor, or TRANS full stop if it's a translator. So right here we've got Wealth of Wives, which was written by Francesco Barbaro, but it was translated by Margaret L. King. So we're going to put Barbaro first, then the title, then right after the abbreviation for translator, we'll put Margaret L. King, and it'll be right after the title, but before the publication information. And you can see right here where you put the translation abbreviation. Now, it would be quite common for you to consult ebooks either through our library catalog or perhaps you found an open access version through a site like the Gutenberg project. Much of the information you need to include is the same as a physical copy. However, you want to make sure your readers will be able to find this book fairly easily. This is why Chicago recommends that when possible, it's best to include the URL or DOI, Digital Object Identifier, at the end of the citation when you are citing an electronic book. But this does get a little trickier if you have access to a book through a database, because oftentimes that means the only people who will have access to the URL are those who already have access to that institution. So for instance, if you access the book through library search and you put the URL in the citation, then generally only people from Oxford Brookes are going to be able to access that link. Now that might not be the end of the world if it's an assignment that's not going to be seen by anyone outside of Brookes, but if you're looking at presenting your assignment to an audience outside of Brookes, or you think it's going to be read by anyone outside of Brookes, then that could be more problematic. In that case, it is advised to list the name of the database where you actually accessed it. So you can see in this example near the bottom, Witchcraft in Russia and Ukraine, we can access this title through the database JSTOR. That's the platform where it's located. And so after we include the author, title, publication information, etc., we're going to put JSTOR at the very end to indicate that that's where you can find that particular ebook. Now, don't worry if this is overwhelming. Unless your assignment brief gives a preference, you shouldn't need to worry too much about whether to include a URL or DOI or database name. Just choose whatever you think will make it easier for people to find the ebook. Now that we've covered how to cite books, we will cover how to cite book chapters in the next video. You can also visit the relevant course resource help pages for your subjects.